There we are. So if you just click the got it, then we're all good to go. So my name is Dawn Davis and I'm the organiser of the event, and I'm the local coordinator for Renew Wales covering RCT. Renew Wales is a national lottery funded programme which supports communities to take enterprise in action against climate change. This event is the first event for the RCT Climate Action Network, which has just started to develop so that we can work together to ensure as many people as possible are engaged in taking action on climate change. So thank you all for taking the time out to attend today. And I want to say a special thank you to the speakers and workshop leaders in advance for coming along to help us start thinking about what more we can do. So as we got a lot to get through today, I want to just hand over, if I can, to Councillor Rhys-Lewis, who's the chair of the Council's Climate Action Committee, Climate Change Committee, sorry, and Leslie Lawson, who's the chair of the Council's Climate Change Working Group, Community Activity, Communication and Engagement. So if I can hand over, and you can say a few words.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
That's great. Thank you, Dawn, and thank you for the welcome. Can I just say it's great to be here in terms of the the first meeting that's been held for the network here in RCT. I thought what I might do before Leslie and Deb come in a little later is maybe just set some of the context in terms of where we are as a council and a county borough with regards to our strategies in terms of tackling climate change. I think that might be useful for those on the call. So as has already been referenced, so I'm Councillor Rhys-Lewis, Cabinet Member with the Council, with also responsibility for the Tackling Climate Change agenda. I'm also Chair of the Tackling Climate Change Steering Group on the Council, which is a cross-party group made up of councillors from across the Council. It's also made up of senior council officers, and it also has independent representation in the form of Friends of the Earth and representatives from Welcome to Our Woods, based in the Upper Rhondda. So the committee was set up, I think we're all missing a year with COVID at the moment. I believe it was 2018 we created the committee, and I think we were certainly one of the first in Wales, if not the UK, to create such a council committee to look at our commitment to tackling climate change. And the remit of the committee really, I suppose, is to, delve into all the different service areas of the council, the different departments, just to make sure that we're all doing our bit in terms of reducing our carbon emissions as a council, and of course to see what we can do also to support those businesses, individuals and community groups across the county borough as well in their endeavours also. So yeah, just to set some context in terms of the types of things that we've been looking at as a council, and I appreciate we have got limited time. I could probably talk about this at length for hours, but just to give a sort of light touch overview. So as a council, we have committed to signing up to the UK 100 clean energy commitment, and we've set the target as a council to be carbon neutral by 2030. And our ambition is to support the wider county borough to be there also at 2030 or as close as possible. And some of the ways in which we hope we can achieve that target. So just focusing on one example, if we start with something I suppose that's prevalent in all our lives, that's the transport strategy. So members on the call might be aware that our strategy is tied up in the wider regional ambitions of the Cardiff capital region, and that is, of course, the Metro project, which certainly those who live close by the rail lines at the moment will be aware of the works going on in terms of electrification of the rail lines and the stanchions that have been put up to enable newer trains, more frequent trains on the Valley's network. In addition to that, and it's something that is often overlooked in the valleys, is the importance of bus travel. I know that there has been work underway on a regional basis to look at how can we better align bus travel with rail travel in the valleys, because if you look in terms of the number of journeys, more journeys are taken by bus in the valleys than trains, simply because the train network doesn't extend throughout all of RCT. And if we're honest about it, I think we've been quite poorly serviced by the private bus companies, certainly since the bus companies were deregulated in the 1980s. So it's something that is my own personal view, that we would certainly welcome some sort of regional approach to that in terms of ticketing, and maybe a regional provider in terms of making sure that all the dots are lined up to allow people to access work and also travel within the county borough. Of course, our ambition isn't just to support those who are commuting out of Rhondda Cynon Taf. Of course, we want to support small and medium-sized businesses in Rhondda Cynon Taf, and to support individuals and families in terms of moving around our county borough as well. And the bus network certainly plays its part. Also, to go along with the transport, again, people on the call might be aware of the investment we put into things like park and ride. There's a number of large park and ride schemes that we've introduced across the county borough, with particular reference to the port transport hub, which is something that's come into fruition, and we've certainly been focusing our energies on that, into creating that lower hub in the Rhondda to support the Bach and the Vowel. Moving on to, in terms of our environmental strategy. So something that I think features very highly in our plan is the need to preserve and enhance our biodiversity across the county borough. We are certainly blessed in the sense that perhaps unlike some more urban areas, you can be, I would say, almost anywhere around the Cynon Taf really, and walk 10, 15, 20 minutes, and you can always be in complete wilderness, where we are blessed with natural assets right in our doorstep in Rhondda Cynon Taf. So in terms of raising awareness of what we do have here in terms of the flora and the fauna, and got many rare species, etc. We do have a biodiversity strategy. In fact, just on Monday of this week, the Rhondda Cynon Taf Cabinet approved a paper which identified 29 sites across Rhondda Cynon Taf that are of sort of special significance with regards to biodiversity. And we'll be investing in those sites now to raise awareness, as I said, and to ensure that those sites are enhanced and protected as much as possible. In addition to that, we do have a tree planting strategy. I know that is very topical, I suppose, in the media and the news also. Somewhat, you wouldn't think it, but it can be controversial in some respects in terms of where you plant trees, what you plant, etc. But we've signed up to the Queen's Canopy project, which is a project to mark the Queen's Jubilee. And our officers are currently identifying sites across Rhondda Cynon Taf where we can support tree planting, whether it's the council directly in our parks, for example, or maybe it's about supporting community or town councils, or individual environmental groups, should they wish to do it, just to ensure that things are all tied up into a wider strategy, and we're not sort of going to cause any issues in the future in terms of maintenance and trees dying, etc., just to ensure that everything is joined up. Following on from that as well, we do have officers working on a project, I believe, with NRW, or they're certainly trying to get NRW on board in terms of the restoration and protection of peat bogs across Rhondda Cynon Taf. Again, something like that might not necessarily jump into people's mind immediately, but that's around, of course, storing carbon. Our peat bogs support an enormous amount of carbon sequestration, and again, raising awareness of that to see what we can do, particularly on the higher, I suppose, the higher areas of Rhondda Cynon Taf, the uplands, I should say. And what I should have said with the tree planting strategy as well, I apologise, is that we are looking to work with NRW around tree planting, particularly on the higher areas of Rhondda Cynon Taf, because what has become clear in recent years, and this again sets some of the context, is that we have fallen victim to a number of extreme weather events in Rhondda Cynon Taf, and if you read the scientists believe, which I certainly do, they are going to become, unfortunately, more frequent. So in terms of trying to build in the resilience of our communities to things such as flooding, which of course we saw on a big scale with Storm Dennis across many parts of Rhondda Cynon Taf, then storing water further up the watercourses in the county borough, I think, needs to be something of a priority. And whether that's tree planting in terms of slowing the water that enters our watercourses and just quite simply runs down the valley sides and into the rivers, which we've had issues with, and culverts, etc. that really is important. But of course, it is a massive task, and it does require funding. And as a council, members on this call will be aware, of course, we've had almost 10 years of austerity, restrained budgets in the council, where we've had to prioritise things like social care and education. And even though we have received funding from Welsh Government for flood alleviation measures, it's an incredible task, and just, I think it was it last week or the week before, we had a localised sort of heavy downpour in Pontypridd, and unfortunately we had a number of houses flooded in in Brydfelyn, and a few in Kilfynydd as well, actually. So that really shows, I suppose, what we're up against in terms of our the infrastructure in around the Cynon Taf. Just touching upon some other areas, so recycling, for example, we've set an ambitious target with regards to recycling, which is above the Welsh Government target. So we've set the target that we want 80% of our waste recycled by 2025. That exceeds the Welsh Government target of 70%. And we are making good progress towards that target. It has been hit somewhat, as most local authorities, I think, will record, by COVID. But that is certainly something that we're focusing on in terms of recycling, making it as accessible as possible. Of course, around the Cynon Taf, unlike many local authorities in Wales, it is the one bag that you simply put things in. There's no need to sort on the doorstep, so to speak. That is done at our recycling centre in Tŷ Amgen. And if members visit our social media, our council social media accounts, they will see that recently I did a video up there with our staff, which really reveals the behind the scenes of what goes on in terms of our recycling in the county borough. There's a lot of myth busting on there. There certainly are a lot of myths out there amongst the public about what actually happens to our recycling. But that some members on the call may well find that quite interesting to look at. Touching upon energy generation. So as a council, we are partnering or seeking to partner with a number of schemes around hydroelectric. We've retrofitted quite a few of our buildings. I'm not sure what percentage it is, but we've certainly retrofitted a lot of our buildings in terms of solar panels. We have a number of large wind energy schemes that have come on stream in the Cynon Taf in recent years. And we also have something of a flagship project in Taf's Well, which is utilising the heat from the thermal spring in Taf's Well, one of the few thermal springs in Wales, to heat the local school. So we're currently making refurbishments to the school in Taf's Well, and the heat from the spring there will be utilised to heat the school. And those are the kinds of innovative projects that officers on the council are looking at, really see, well, is there scope to really partner up with organisations or in fact generate electricity ourselves in a clean and sustainable way. So that's certainly something that the council is looking at. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else. I'm conscious of time, but I mean, in terms of things that people may well see out and about. So, for example, we've adjusted our grass cutting schedule as a council, which again, I hope that wasn't a signal for me to stop talking, was it?
No, sorry. Complete stuff with the button. Sorry, carry on.
No, in terms of our grass cutting schedule, I'm just trying to think of the things that the people can sort of see most visibly, I suppose, as they travel throughout the county borough. So we have adjusted our grass cutting schedule, particularly on road verges, to encourage wildflowers and pollinators, etc., and our roundabouts. Not on all, of course, it is impossible on all due to safety in terms of driver safety, pedestrian safety, and the visual display, etc. But in many sites as well, which feeds into our biodiversity strategy, we are encouraging the meadows where possible, to flourish again. We've got a number of areas. One comes to mind, the cemetery in Llantrisant. Can't recall the cemetery's name now, it'll come to me shortly, where we effectively have, allowed the meadow to sort of regenerate on the site, which then is cut, I believe twice a year. I'm not an expert on this one, so twice a year. And then we use the cuttings, if you like, from that. Then they are recycled, into compost, etc. So certainly is a lot going on, you know, in terms of wider strategy. It is an ambitious strategy. It's not one we can achieve alone. I think my mantra certainly has been, since we created the council committee looking at climate change, is that we don't have all the answers. Whilst it is, of course, important that local government takes a lead and your elected leaders locally take a lead, we certainly have a lot to learn as well, I think, from others in the county borough, whether it be community groups, you know, third sector, or even business as well. You know, we don't have all the wisdom or the virtue on this. So in terms of that wider conversation that we wish to have with residents and encourage their views, we have launched 2 consultations in recent months. So the first one was around our climate change strategy. So that was trying to gain, as I said, the views and opinions of residents as widely as we could. That was wrapped up in our Let's Talk consultation. We do have a web page if you search for Let's Talk with a link there in which sort of states that how can residents get involved in our conversation and tell us the way they'd like to see us shaping things as a county borough. And most recently, we've had a consultation on our electric vehicle strategy. Of course, this is something, again, which has become more prevalent, you know, in terms of discussions and in the media, etc. In terms of the charging ports throughout the county borough. Again, many would have noticed that quite a few private sector companies are starting to introduce them, particularly supermarkets, into their car parks, etc. But we felt it was important that we took a strategic view on this as a county borough to see, well, where would it be most appropriate to develop our network? So the consultation, I believe, and Leslie will correct me if I'm wrong, the consultation is due to end or may have ended already. So we'll be gathering the views in terms of forming our EV strategy. Our thinking on that is that there are difficulties with it, in the sense that, although of course it is welcome that we're, you know, the switch to electric vehicles. Of course, many of the materials in the vehicles are precious metals that are mined from the earth, often in countries that have poor human rights records. So for me personally, there are some issues with that. And of course, just because we are switching to electric vehicles, you know, there's no guarantee in a sense that the number of vehicles on the road are going to decrease. In fact, the evidence suggests that car ownership will continue to increase unless we have good and affordable and reliable public transport, which offers an alternative, and of course active travel as well, which is really important. And you know, we have spent a significant amount in Rhondda and Taff in recent years in terms of developing and enhancing our active travel network. There certainly is more that we can do. You know, I don't think we hide from that. You know, there are gaps in the network, but we are committed to doing our bit in terms of enhancing that. But in terms of the EV strategy, that is something we're looking at from a perspective of equity across the county borough. Of course, we do have many deprived areas across Rhondda and Taff in terms of the legacy of post-industrialisation, etc. And as a general rule, although it's sometimes advisable to avoid general rules, for those who may, you know, live in more affluent communities, particularly in the south of the county borough, who may have drives on their properties, of course, or you know, maybe have a higher income, it'd be far easier for those individuals or families perhaps to install electric charging points on their property and benefit from you know, owning an electric vehicle. But that would pose difficulties, particularly in the north of the county borough, where we have the old terrace streets, the street scenes in the north of the county borough. For many, electric vehicles still, you know, in terms of affordability, it's just not an option. We do have some of the lowest rates of car ownership actually in the UK in many of our communities as well. So in terms of seeing electric vehicles, I think as the only, certainly not the only solution to our you know, in terms of tackling carbon emissions, certainly does help to improve air quality across the county borough in terms of the emissions from the vehicles itself. But I think you know, it's something that needs to be looked at further in depth. It's not going to be you know, the solution in itself. So I think that's a brief overview for myself, Dawn. I mean, I'm happy to take questions perhaps while after Dawn and Deb have said their bit. I know they're going to perhaps elaborate on a few of the points that I made already and hasten to say perhaps correct or fill in the gaps from what I've said. But that, I suppose, gives an overview really of where we are as elected members on the county borough. We are conscious of the emergency that faces us. Whilst we haven't declared an emergency formally as a county borough, the reason for that simply is that, you know, we wanted to back up words with actions. So we wanted to ensure that, you know, our strategies are in place and we're confident that they are, you know, adequate to meet the needs, or certainly recognise where the challenges are, so we can lobby on those. You know, there's nothing to say that in the future we might not well declare climate change emergency, but I'm somebody certainly who believes that there's no point in using words unless you've got actions to back them up. So that's it from me. Thank you, Dawn. Diolch yn fawr. Hello, anyone there?
We're all here.
Oh,
It's waiting for Dawn, I think.
sorry. I was on mute. Oh no. Okay, thank you very much.
There's a pregnant pause then. I didn't know what was coming.
I thought I was saying something, but I wasn't. Thank you ever so much for that. We won't have time for questions today, but if we can hand over to Leslie, maybe she'll be able to add to what you've already said. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I'm not sure I can add much to the actual detail that Councillor Lewis has explained to us. There is a lot going on within the council, as you will have heard, and it's been going on for quite some time, and we've been, I suppose, restricted because of the pandemic as to actually getting out and talking to people and understanding more about what they are looking to do. But the reason I think that I'm in this call, and I'm really happy to be here, and I welcome Dawn's reach out at this point, is because what we've recognised is that there is a need to tell more people about what we are doing, to engage with more people and to communicate with more people about what's going on. So we've got this, I'm going to call it Community Activity Comms and Engagement Group, because we've always got to have a big title for a working group. And as part of that, we are looking at this climate change conversation, and Councillor Lewis has talked about the Let's Talk Climate Change for the strategy and the EV work. We'll find something coming out shortly around wildflowers and trees. And we've also had a face-to-face series of discussions with people across the county borough about what they want, what they are thinking about, how they are looking at climate change. And we've had these face-to-face meetings in Aberdare, and Sangharad Park, Mountain Ash, Rydfelyn, Tonopandi and Treorchy. And of the discussions we've had, 99% of the residents that we talked to thought that it was really, really important that we we tackle climate change together, and that they, surprisingly, around about half think that they're doing enough to reduce their carbon footprint, but I'm not sure if they actually understand what their carbon footprint is, because that's not easy to calculate. So we've seen that the scale of interest in communities range from, significant interest to very little. And what we are the other gap that we found is that we don't know enough about what's happening in communities, which is why I'm really, really pleased to be reaching all of you today, so that you can help to populate. And when I say map, I mean a proper map, some community activities at some point on a map of RCT, so that we can track who's doing what and how we can support and share good practice. It's not for the councillors, as Councillor Lewis has said, it's not for the council to manage and coordinate all this, but really to support the work to identify what these activities are, and then possibly take it forward with partners, Interlink, yourself, Dawn, other community bodies, so that we can look at how people are managing their own activities and how we can share that information, around about how people get about, how we shop, where we shop, what we eat, what we wear, how we heat our homes. So there's a lot of information that we really need to capture before we can start real engagement, I think, so that we're engaging with the right people at the right time about the right things. I'm also conscious that in the next, over the next month, we've got the launch of the Net Zero Wales plan coming out next week. Julie James announced that last week. We've got COP26 regional roadshows in early November. And we've got Wales Climate Week within the 22nd to the 26th of November. So there's a lot going on. And we want to be able to work with you, Dawn, and everyone here to help us to shape the next steps, I suppose. So I'm happy to take questions outside the meeting or have contact Dawn in the future. But unless anyone's got anything else to say, I'd like to hand over to Deb, who's got the community aspect.
Thanks, Leslie. One of the things we wanted to say is at the moment we are reflective of the fact that there is a host of really innovative work being developed across RCT with voluntary sector partners, NRW and others in terms of looking at climate change. It's got such a wide context, and I know I can see some of the participants in this morning's webinar. We're actively working with you on various land inquiries. So what we're currently doing I'm part of the RCT Together team, it's a community development team, and we act as the sort of facilitators in the process when community groups have got inquiries, normally for buildings. That's been some of our historical work, but certainly as we've come out of COVID, we've seen an absolutely phenomenal increase in the number of inquiries for land use, etc., for a variety of different things. And one of the things that we're keen to try and do is we're working with our corporate estates colleagues and some of our land portfolio holders, so some of that could be with our leisure colleagues, just to look at developing proportionate tenancy options for groups who are best able to manage land for a variety of things. We're really keen to look at good practice from other areas as well. And I know obviously I can see Ian and Matthew are in this call, and there's a good piece of work going on in the North Rhondda. I won't say too much in case they're talking about that, but it's very much working in a co-productive way with community partners, NRW, looking at how you bring together exactly what Councillor Lewis has just said, is bring those experts together to look at what's working, what are those challenges. So from an RCT Together perspective, we are working ourselves through a process at the moment where, again, internally, we need to make sure that sometimes there will be proposals that come in. There may be competing considerations where, for instance, there may be economic benefits, there may be health and well-being benefits. How does that play? So the climate change agenda is certainly needing to be infiltrated into our processes in how we make decisions on some of those land management inquiries. So that's one thing we wanted to ask. On the back of what Leslie just said, we're really keen to find out. We know there's lots of work going on, from everything from levering in funding for electrical vehicle charging points to food reduction, sustainable community food growing projects, innovative ideas for using underused land, biodiversity projects. So we're keen, we don't want to create any new sort of system. So if there is someone out there already doing that mapping, or there is a way we can gather that, we're really keen within the RCT Together team. And I've popped our mailbox information. So if any groups do have any inquiries in terms of what they can contribute to the climate change agenda, or if they're looking to use any council land, we don't declare council land surplus per se, but we are interested in if you've got a proposal that will positively contribute to the climate change agenda whilst addressing health and well-being, economic outcomes, etc. We'd be really keen to use that. We know there's a big push by public health colleagues about making land available for green social prescribing activities. So it's really a call of arms to say, tell us about the innovative work that you're doing. If there's innovative work going on in other areas of Wales, we'd really like to know. I can see Lucy, you're in on the meeting. So again, strengthening these working relationships with partners. We don't have all the answers. We're aware that there's lots of innovative stuff going on. We'd like to be part of that discussion with you. And I'll stop at that point.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of you. It's been really, really informative. And yeah, definitely hope we can help to create that map of activity that's going on to tackle climate change in RCT. So I'd like to hand over to Calvin Jones now, Professor Calvin Jones, and ask him to say a few words.
Thanks, Dawn. I feel a little bit this morning like I'm in a bit of a parallel universe where I'm listening to all this good stuff that's happening, and the majority of my brain remains completely terrified about the prospect of living in a world shaped with a climate and nature emergency. I think, I wasn't going to talk specifically about RCT despite being a resident and a voter, but I think, if I hear the list of activities which are going on and have been going on for a few years, I find that difficult to square with a council website that doesn't mention climate change anywhere, so as I can see, certainly in terms of the investment programme, apart from one or two small mentions in terms of response to Dennis, and where we celebrate the building of new roads. Reece, you can shake your head. I looked this morning where we celebrate the building of new roads, and where if I want to charge my car, I've got to go to Caerphilly to do it. If I've got an EV and it comes from car park, so there aren't any in RCT on car park. Is that wrong, Reece? Can I charge my car in Sardis, for example? I offered to join the climate emergency group in 2018, and they said no thanks. So, as somebody I'm supposed to be represented by the council, and what I need is a council which is genuinely going to have an honest conversation with people about how absolutely terrifying, how massively damaging, particularly to poor people in the county. And Reece makes loads of good points about this, and I agree with everything he says about EVs and everything he says about the need to make sure this is a just transition. But at some point, we have to go beyond the council communicating and engaging with people and trying to knit together what's happening at smaller spatial scales, to a council that has a vision that says this is what we think RCT is going to look like in 2030 or 2050. And these are the tough choices that we have to make. And this is the way in which we have to adapt, yes, what the council does itself, but also the way in which we message the residents of the council and upwards towards Welsh Government and other people to make it really clear that RCT is absolutely at the vanguard and prepared to make these tough decisions, to walk that walk as well as talk that talk. And when it comes down to pedestrianisation of town centres, when it comes down to other difficult choices, we can do studies on microhydro, but you know what, if you want some renewable energy, the quickest, easiest and cheapest things to do is stick loads and loads of onshore wind across the county. People don't like it. People will hate it. But you got 46 seats, 60-something% of the council seats. There is no electoral downside in this. If you can reply, Cymru, I'm sure we'll be happy to do it. And we have to start upsetting people, and we have to start being honest with people that if we are serious about a green economy, if we are serious about genuinely creating prosperity from the upcoming changes, then that will only happen if we can sell ourselves as a properly resilient, low carbon, responsible county borough, and more widely set of values. And so far, I've just not seen any movement towards that. And it really frustrates me that we are sitting in an economic system which is absolutely screwing us, excuse my language. It's absolutely making life in the Rhondda where I'm from, and in the Park Ponty I live now, up on the Graig, absolutely horrible. And we have a chance to re-envisage a system which does include more local work, It does include more meaningful work, supporting communities and our families, and supporting well-being. It does include maybe less work, so we can spend more time closer to home with our families. But you know, it doesn't include a new iPhone every year, or a German car, EV or otherwise. And that's the critical conversation that I think RCT, not on its own, but with others, can have a conversation on. What is it that we value as a set of communities? What do we really want to protect over the next 30 or 40 years of really, really tough times? And what is it that we can afford to leave behind? And, you know, I think without these robust conversations, we are going to be in trouble, because I've just joined the board of Natural Resources Wales 3 or 4 weeks ago. And it's an unfortunate reality that all the sensible upland planting in the world, in terms of, as Rhys said, slowing down floodwaters, all of which is absolutely necessary, none of that would have stopped Storm Dennis flooding Ponty, and none of it will stop the next storm flooding Ponty. It's too much water. So you know what? I haven't got a single carpet downstairs in my house. You know, and those are the sorts of conversations, that's the sort of level of discussion we need to be having in terms of resilience. How can we actually start, you know, the talk about heat pumps at the moment, you know, is an indication of the deep changes people will have to make to their heating systems in order to become carbon neutral. And I think, you know, what I would say is I'm quite optimistic, you know, as we've heard already, that if the council actually started to not just have these conversations, but lead them, they would find loads of willing supporters, and I would certainly be one of them. So I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you, Calvin. So what I want to do now is to move straight into workshops. So we can have, you've got a choice of which workshop you can join. So Dallas is going. I was wondering if anybody wants to give us some feedback. Did you learn anything? Did you get new ideas? Do you want to suddenly go off and do more recycling or grow food, or what are your thoughts?
We're blown away by Chris and Gail, who are not Susan or Christopher, the project in Carmel Chapel. And I think what came out of it was the lockdown was a really good opportunity for them to actually sit down and plan their project before launching it, which meant that once it launched, it's been really successful. So we, you know, what went well, the list of things that have gone well was really, really long. The things that they need help with, and this was a common theme across the board, was what to do with the stuff, basically with other people's landfill. So the stuff that's actually literally almost, in some instances, other people's rubbish. Where does that go? So I think that's potentially where the local authority could work with community groups that are tackling textiles supply chain, is where can the local authority come in and help these groups understand where that end of life material can have a useful second home. So where are the textiles recyclers? Where have the local authority got links with that industry that can support communities with that? But then we also talked about the opportunities for these groups to now work together across RCT. So for Carmel Chapel to have links with Breakout strategy, with people and work units, and with the repair cafes that are starting to emerge, and looking at fashion shows and repurposing clothing, and then making that a thing that people aspire to.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks for that feedback. Simon?
Yeah, I think, yeah, what's coming back from me is two things, I suppose, is what Ken just said about how do you get support to people to network and work together. And I think what Kelvin probably rose already, which you probably won't go down too well at this stage, but we need to get there, is the council talks about engagement and messaging and communication, where it's about relationships and conversations. Not telling us what you're doing, but having a conversation about what we're all doing. So I think they probably take that message back, and they're very from the people I work with, they're very good. And Councillor Rees will take that message on board, and I'm sure they'll become a bit more join the conversation, be very active in that conversation. I just think they probably need a bit of support to get to that conversation with people like yourselves to make sure that it sounds like a conversation where people are really understanding what others are doing, and the council's got such an important role to employ, not just as a doer but as a catalyst for others to take action. So yeah, so we think we'll probably do some great work together in the future after this event, I think, and that'll take some discussion.
Okay, great. Thanks, Simon. Anybody in Lucy's workshop, community land ownership, growing food? Anybody take something back from that? Or Lucy, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I can just try and summarise a little bit, and anyone else could chip in if they want. Yeah, it was really positive discussion, and everyone had something to say about the increase in demand for land to grow local food from a community-led perspective, which was really encouraging that I'm still going to be in a job. Yeah, there's we're going to have some continued conversations, come back wetlands, we're going to join up how we can support them. Joff Carroll was talking about the Boys and Girls Clubs of Wales and how their redundant land around those clubs in the Rhondda may be useful for community food growing. Tom from Wales Co-op was talking about some of the governance things that we can join up on, and obviously talking about the popularity of accessing land for community food growing type projects. Deb and I need to sit down and have a conversation about sort of social value, rationale really, and projected value on sort of social return and investment, and how we can perhaps sell that a bit more to funders if that's something that they would be interested in hearing more about. So yeah, we're going to be joining forces quite a bit more, I think, and we've made some really good links. And yeah, I had the opportunity to get my service across, so everyone knows about us now, how we can support them, which is always good.
Brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Do we still have Andrew with us? Andrew Burns?
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, Andrew, do you want to just say a quick thing about bike recycling in RCT?
Well, just saying that there is quite a few, three bike recycling projects happening in RCT, all educational focused, but they're all very much at the start of their journey. So hopefully they'll go from this point and grow. They've all started really within the last year or two. So it's still quite small, but there's a great potential, obviously, because there's no other bike recycling going on. There's no sort of large scale bike recycling going on in RCT. So in terms of accessing bikes and selling bikes, there's still a sort of huge potential.
Yes, there's an opportunity there for several organisations possibly, isn't there, to take, to start leading on that. Thank you, Andrew. And Peter Draper.
Yeah, I'm happy to give a quick report back, but if anybody else wants to jump in, feel free. I mean, basically, our discussion was all about sort of the changing face of retrofit and the fact that it was becoming much more holistic. And there was also sort of a pent-up desire, I think, from people to do the right thing. And just to let people know that there are bids going in from people like Community Energy Wales, which will hopefully sort of take all the learning that's been going on in the social landlord sector and then sort of the owner-occupied and the private rented sector. So that's happening, but it's very immature. The whole new way of doing is very, very immature, so it's going to take a little bit of time to bed in. We also had, it was very vocally expressed really that sort of the opportunities that community energy provide really need to be taken, and I think that to have the benefits of community energy being fed directly back into the community is something that should be explored. And then the other thing was people were quite surprised, I think, about some of the works that innovative works that RCT has been doing that they were completely and utterly unaware of. So, you know, there's a whole communication issue there between, you know, what the council's actually doing and you know, disseminating that information and that knowledge, you know, across to the wider community. So there's a body of work to be done there, I think, as well. But I think overall, you know, there's a realization that, you know, a lot of this stuff is structural, and you know, how much can be done on a local level, especially from people who've got very few resources, is going to be quite difficult. So you know, we're at the behest of other powers, I suppose.
More work to be done then, Peter.
Always.
Always, yes, exactly. So thank you ever so much. So we're going to have a 10-minute comfort break now. So if you want to put your camera off, leave it on.
Before everyone shoots off, just very briefly, is the voice of those with learning difficulties. How do we facilitate that voice to be heard?
Yeah, well, Renew Wales has done a little bit of work on that. So if people want to go over to our YouTube channel and have a look, then, you know, you'll see a little bit of work that we've done on that, and some ideas. But I'm sure there's more to be done on that, in that area. So we'll reconvene at 11:15. Want to grab a quick drink or whatever? We'll see you. Okay, thank you. That wasn't very long, was it? 10 minutes flies. Okay, so we go into do another task now. Now, as a coordinator for Renew Wales, my colleagues and I, we've recently been learning about a community foresight project, which is a WCVA pilot called the Better Futures Project. It builds on discussions with diverse voluntary and community groups about how they can shape a positive future. The purpose of this project is to encourage participants and their communities to dream about what a better future looks like for them, and to develop an action plan for implementation. And I think this is what Calvin Jones was saying this morning that is missing, really. We are now going to put you into breakout rooms to take you through one of the exercises used in this process. So I'm going to pose you a question. So if anybody wants to write this down, because if you're anything like me, as soon as I get in the breakout room, I've completely forgotten what's been asked. So then you will be randomly selected to go into your breakout room, and you'll have 25 minutes for discussion. If you can choose a scribe when you get there, so that we can get some feedback later. So the question is, we want you to find some seeds of change, which are ideas for you to improve the way we live now. They have to be ideas that do not have a negative impact on the lives of future generations. We want you to develop 3 seeds of change and to bring them back to us. To help you thinking, you have permission for the next half an hour to imagine that you have all the resources you need at your fingertips to be able to implement your ideas. So you can be as imaginative as you like. So we're gonna go straight into our breakout groups now. And then we're gonna get you back at 11:45 for feedback.
Hi Dawn, it's Matt here. I just wondered if it's worth checking that everyone knows what they're going to do in the breakout sessions, in case anyone came back a bit late from the break. Maybe we could just check that, otherwise people may go into the breakout sessions and without knowing what they're doing.
Yeah, is anybody not sure?
Is it possible just to type into the chat, or do we lose that chat when we go into the breakout rooms?
No, we don't lose it. Yeah, if you could, I've been on a call, so I don't know.
I'll just put in there seeds of change, but ones that don't have a negative impact.
Yeah.
But I know the question was longer than that. So I sort of summarise it.
Basically, you imagine life, how you want to change the way we live life now. So we want 3 seeds of change, 3 changes you want to make as big as you like to the light way we live in now, but it does not compromise future generations.
And we have more than 3.
No.
Oh.
You could do that later in the comfort of your own home, Ken. Okay, then 3 would be good. If you do one more than 3, then we may have time for feedback, but your 3 top ones at least. Okay, so you're going to go into breakout rooms now.
Yeah, and this is a half-an-hour session, isn't it?
Yeah, it finishes at 11:15, so it'll be 25 minutes now. We want to get feedback from each group now. So if we can have the scribe from group number 1, please give us your 3 seeds of change.
Who is group number 1?
We don't know which group numbers we were.
I do, sorry. So if we go, sorry, I was on mute. It go Ian, Calvin, then Chris to give us 3 ideas.
Yeah, first idea, there's 2 ideas, but it could be the same thing. And we talked about an RCT energy supplier, electricity supplier to renewable energy based on potentially taking over the wind farm after 20 years when the wind turbines Vattenfall project finishes and things like that. And we could be doing the renewable energy. But also about district heating systems. We thought about this long rows of houses, and if the council got involved and maybe made end terraces or mid terraces, the pump house and the heat room, that could be a way of doing district heating systems.
Great, thank you.
My turn, I think. Yeah, so second idea is a low carbon community, futures community toolkit, which helps communities understand what their carbon footprint is, what their other environmental inputs are, and how they generate their well-being and income through employment and other means, and allows them to kind of game and scenario test different options, including more localized employment, different balance between leisure and work, and the different ways in which they can look to reduce their carbon footprint, for example, comparing transport, housing, and other options and investments. So we have a more educated population who can then engage much more sophisticated way around the options they have in order to make themselves both more sustainable and responsible. And I'll be doing some of this next year with Ian and other people.
Brilliant.
Chris?
Well, the point that I'm going to suggest is the one that we discussed towards the end of the conversation, sort of broadening out our discussion, and wondered around to what extent the percentage of bottom up or top down energy was important to creating the changes that we'd like to make. We kind of came to the conclusion that top down was very important, perhaps more important, and that drifted us towards a post-capitalist society idea. So in that sort of blue sky thinking sort of way, with very much at the heart of it, kind of embracing outdoor living supported by 100% local renewables, and to trigger that idea or that kind of local society, we thought that it would be a good idea to try and give everybody a sustainably fueled outdoor hot tub.
Yeah, that captures the idea that, you know, some people, we're talking about people who potentially want to talk about society, but actually it's people who have a lifestyle, want to maintain that lifestyle. So how do you give them options to maintain the lifestyle that's environmentally and carbon neutral?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So could we have feedback from group 2, breakout room 2?
I don't know what groups we are. Sorry.
We were 6.
Oh, were we? Okay.
You want to go ahead then, Lucy?
Yeah, I don't mind.
Go on then.
Yeah, so RCT change. We talked about mass reduction of plastics in the home, and encouraging local suppliers like grocers and butchers so that we can actually stop using sort of hard and soft plastics from retailers within the home. We have sort of conversations about waste less in the kitchen and waste less in the bathroom, those sorts of things. So mass reduction of plastic in the home is our first one. Then the second one was, we talked about sort of the controllable diet side of things and reduction in red meat consumption, perhaps having a meat-free Monday, or encouraging everyone to have a day or two a week where they don't eat meat. And then finally, we talked about large-scale retrofit housing and improving fuel poverty, with using local people and local businesses to roll that out across the Rhondda. So yeah, those were the three: reduction in plastics, reduction in red meat consumption, and large-scale retrofit housing using local people and businesses.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lucy.
Okay.
So who's the next scribe that we've got to speak?
I'm happy to go next.
Go on then, Ken.
Okay, so I've put some stuff in the sidebar because I wasn't sure how this was going to work. So sharing resource, zero emissions. So share the resources such as knowledge and infrastructure to generate more electricity and heat. So we talked about terrace streets. I've got solar panels on my terrace street, but you can only put it on so much of the roof area. Whereas if it was an entire street project, you'd have the whole street roof to use. For example, zero waste, reducing consumption. So there's lots of local interventions that are working really, really well. And those local interventions are able to tap into the waste stream at a community level. So stuff isn't going into the waste stream to start with. Then how do we connect those groups that are operating at that level across RCT, so they're then scaling up, not by taking over the whole county, but by working with other community groups and organisations. And then on spend, procurement, always a big bugbear. There's carbon input coming into procurement rules, and how will that change procurement at a local level, so that stuff like green stream carpets gets purchased ahead of brand new carpet because it's cheaper.
Okay,
can I just mention, Dawn, because people wouldn't be aware of that, there is a procurement piece of work around the circular economy led by CUMTAF PSB. So we just need to give that information so people know what's going on.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, how many groups did we have, Matt? Must have been 6, was it?
We had 5, so I don't know how you were in groups.
5. Well, there we are. Maybe it was 5.
There's 2 more groups. One had Anne Hayes, Caitlin Birch.
I don't think going for them, Matt.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't think we kind of set on 3, but we did have a great discussion about lots of different areas. I think one of the key ones was about stimulating the appetite for local energy generation. You know, how do we do that? When we talk about local energy generation is where we usually talking about land. I think probably we, you know, if we were to plant a seed of change, it'd be about encouraging, I suppose, that discussions about what land is available, rather than encouraging groups who've got an idea to come forward, not knowing where to go. I think it's about enabling that. That was one of the key things. The other was about local food networks, but not just about the local food, actually doing it at a scale as well, and actually how the local food network can bring in various other sort of wider issues in terms of, you know, arts in the outdoor spaces, engaging children and young people in outdoor spaces within food as well. And then one of the other things I think for stimulating change, or one of the other things, the steps, the change was a change in the way people think and behaviour. And we're not talking about just local residents here, but in the way we do it as organisations, in terms of, you know, more holistic thinking. And very much said that very often we think in, sometimes we think in a box and what our key area piece of work is, but what we need to be doing is fitting this agenda to our, you know, fitting this agenda and put it into our boxes, not just saying, sorry, it can't happen because of this, and being braver in terms of you know, in terms of procurement, the way we work with procurement, and give another example of where they couldn't use a local brewery to supply because of procurement law and different things. I know Simon has just said about the PSB doing work into that, which is really, really good. But yeah, it's just in terms of stimulating that way people think. We've got the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and it's about utilising that legislation and maybe even better understanding of that legislation to drive it forward, really. Group, please jump in if I missed anything, because we did speak about a lot.
Thank you, Tom. That's great.
You've muted yourself, Dawn, I think. But
I don't know how that keeps happening. Anyway, the last group then, who's going to speak for that group?
well, surprise, surprise.
Hi, Rita.
Hello. Right. Well, we had quite a wide-ranging conversation, really, and we had lots of suggestions. But the three that we decided to go with, initially at least, were first off growing community enterprises to a much more industrial scale. So actually, you're then supplanting the profit motive for a not-for-profit motive. So leading to a sort of low-scale revolution in that regard. The second one was looking at early intervention in the education system to ensure that those people who are most in need of support got that support, which would hopefully then give them sort of a way of more opportunities and hopefully divert them away from certain lifestyles and into a much more cooperative sort of mindset, which should be better for all communities. So we're sort of quite ethereal now, all this sort of stuff, really. And the last one was we were going to set up a Dignitas Cymru to allow people to end their life on their own terms. And we thought this might be based in Machynlleth, where we do a large composting program. So those were the three that we decided to go with. There's many others sort of looking at sort of planning rules and how that might be sort of restructured around things like warm rents rather than the traditional sort of models that people are used to. Sort of repatriation of Wales away from the landed gentry, and that was also tied in with stopping tax dodging and involving people with learning disabilities more in the decision-making process.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks so much, Peter. Need to talk to Ken about the Dignitas idea. Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. So we've got another break now for 10 minutes, and we'll come back at 12:15. Okay, so you're going to go back into your breakout groups now and discuss and identify the top 2 impacts that your seeds of change are going to have on people, the environment, society, whatever it is. So for example, I think there's people in each group that understand what I mean by impacts. Is there anybody that doesn't really know what I mean by impacts? Okay, so Matt's got the task now of getting you back in your breakout rooms.
Easy enough. Here we go.
So Dawn, it's just the top 2 impacts for each of those seeds of change, yeah?
I put Glesney and Emir into room 2 because they were down just the 2 people because of a couple of people had left.
Can't wait to hear. Can't wait to hear about how you found that. I was in a group and it wasn't as straightforward as I thought it was going to be. So but let's ask Ken to feedback on your group then, Ken, what you found.
Has everyone seen the slide where it says, what if he's at a big conference, COP 3007 or whatever, and the guy's on the stage and there's a thing in the background. He says, someone puts their hand up and says, what if climate change turns out to be made up and we've all made the world a better place for nothing? Yes. So I think that was what we were very much focused on in our session. So the two impacts were, so we had sharing resources to generate electricity. So if you share resources, we'll get more done. So that was the first impact. The second one, which was a lot more involved, was that we will live in a more harmonious and cooperative society, because people will be in a position where, you know, the council is showing leadership, is being the change, and is taking those risks on behalf of the rest of us. And as a result, and is communicating why it's doing it, so more people understand what's happening. And then that creates a tipping point where you start to shift away from the sharers being minority and the selfish being a majority, to more of the sharers and those who are still kind of not that engaged. Well, they're in a minority, so it doesn't matter so much anymore. Someone did mention guns, but we realized afterwards we'd misheard them. And then there's also part of that then a changed perception of wealth and value, that communities start to compete with each other. So it's not a question of whether or not you've got a swimming pool in your community or not. It's a question of, well, we've got 3 community gardens. How many community gardens have you got? Well, you may have 3 community gardens, but we have a car share space in our community. So you start to get, you know, our community is wealthy because of the shared resources we've got. And that's how we measure wealth within our community. So yeah, all good.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, very interesting.
And the ones that don't like it, that's what the guns are for.
So does that cover in the 3 impacts, the 3 seeds change?
Well, they all sort of, the impacts of those sort of structural changes start to have wider social impacts, which are then a result of all the seeds, if you like.
So would you, 3 seeds, be combined to just develop in a sharing economy?
Yeah. No.
Okay.
The seeds would all lead to those impacts.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. So who else fed back last time? Where are you? Deborah, do you want to feedback for your group?
Yeah, we had a bit of a sort of a challenging sort of discussion, wasn't it, where things, as you said, things aren't straight forward. Every positive, there's sometimes a negative attached to that. So I think our group felt that sometimes you didn't know if you're doing right from wrong. Using Ken's approach, so in terms of our 3 seeds, which were about reducing plastic, looking at reducing consumption of meat, and looking at retrofit housing, in terms of the impact, a lot of those had reduction in use of carbon. There was some reduction of contamination in terms of you know, the use of plastics and how that's affecting our wildlife and nature. I know Liz mentioned her composting, and that, you know, she's putting sort of recyclable clothes in there. Half of them are containing plastics rather than cotton. When we looked at the message around, you know, meat-free Mondays and others, there's that competing considerations between economic benefits and wanting to make sure that the farming industry in Wales is really important. We don't want to lose grasslands. We want to make sure that, you know, we get that right balanced message, and it's very easy to tip from a positive choice message being taken in the wrong way. We talked about the benefits for our biodiversity, reduction in carbon consumption, improvements in health, but we needed to get a balanced approach. We don't want to alienate key audiences. We talked about responsible farming. We talked about consumer choice and legislation. In terms of the retrofit housing, again, it was felt that there was potential for fuel poverty gains, impact on the economy, so that there would potentially be a massive carbon saving. We talked about the life cycle analysis that sometimes, you know, in order to retrofit, there would be at least a sort of a life cycle analysis gain. We talked about the practical implications of LED lights and looked at insulation being very important, and how some of this retrofitting needed to look at some of the wildlife in terms of swifts and sparrows nesting in roof insulation, and how you delicately deal with that, because we've seen a huge decline in terms of the population of some of those species. We talked about wind farms both having a positive and sometimes a negative impact in terms of peat bog restoration. Good, red kites, no. Yeah, I think the summary was it wasn't straightforward. So is how do you get our messaging right?
We even touched on wind farms, didn't we? And you know, wind farms are great, but there's also the consideration of the impact on wildlife of wind farms as well. So nothing is straightforward. And you know, we mentioned that we perhaps in a transition period, we haven't got all the answers yet. We can only work with what we've got at the moment. Yeah, thanks, Deborah. Really fair. Thanks very much. Right, who's next? Come forward.
We can come forward, group 4.
Oh, great.
So ours were, we were told to do 2, but there we are. So first one, community enterprise. We thought that would have a big impact. Well, we thought, first of all, we talked about how difficult it would be, you know, taking, you know, for example, a small allotment group, could that effectively turn itself into, say, a large, you know, group that's going to be growing lots of veg, you know, in a series of huge greenhouses, for example. You know, how, you know, what would the pressures be, and how would it change the group and the dynamics of all that? So absolutely fraught with loads and loads of issues around that, and certainly as money becomes more important potentially than the social sort of side of it. However, the impacts we thought were obviously in local employment, local training, community resilience, and also on the circular economy. So we thought there would be some major benefits in that regard. As far as sort of climate change, etc., is concerned, well, probably less so. But if it's a social enterprise which was formed out of you know, a willingness to address these sorts of issues, then that should be carried forward to the larger business. It also may have an impact actually on the way society works and the value you know, sort of given over to community enterprises rather than private enterprises in terms of politicians. Anyway, so that was the first one. The second one was looking at early intervention in the educational sector. So we thought that would have major impacts on issues like societal cohesion, antisocial behaviour, cooperation, reducing both suffering from the individual and also crime for the wider community, thus saving money, and also saving and creating much greater social capital. So it was all very much based around, sort of, as Ken sort of suggested in his response, it's all about making society better overall. We did talk very quickly in the last minute about our lovely Dignitas Cymru, and we thought that there's certain side benefits, like, you know, more parking outside the bingo hall, but also sort of freeing up resources potentially in the housing market. And no doubt you get some very rich compost coming out of Machynlleth. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. And who's the next group? The last group.
Okay, I'll come in there if I may.
Right.
I was a bit late to the group, so we were already way down the line in terms of an alternative to the capitalist society we currently live in. So yeah, the impacts of that were to be looking at more resourceful and resilient communities with a different view of what success looks like. So it's not just about money in your pocket, it's about your well-being. And then talked about how do you move to that local, more scale of things, and that's really talking about you need to have conversations with local people and relationships, and in a way every organization is an asset in that community, and there tends to be people talking to people. They talked about a methodology that Calvin's using about talking to people about their trade-offs and talking about what the impacts of that is. So little apps and things saying, okay, do you want to spend more time at home? Do you want to earn more money? And realizing you can't do all of those things all at once, and what's your preferred choice? Then having some action steps behind some of that work. So you would say, okay, I want to spend more time in my garden, and that would lead to, okay, what support do you need to do that? Well, you need someone to give you advice about how to dig up your allotment, how to source sustainable compost, how to do a compost instead of turning it into a squidgy mess in the back of your house. So all of that stuff. So there's kind of engagement, involvement, support for people to move to where they want to go to. And really about involving local businesses and local companies about just what does this organization look for, and you need to have the relationships to identify what people can contribute. So whatever people call that, so a local exchange trading scheme and using bitcoins and all that stuff, well, not bitcoins obviously, our coins, to look at ways in which you then, so every community has, in theory, has got all the assets it needs, but then nobody knows what they are and nobody's talking to each other. So whatever you do to make local work, you have to make sure everybody has an opportunity to contribute, and you have to do some work to get everyone to know who they are and connect them together.
Small task then, Simon.
Well, start by a street, and it's not that complicated.
No, that's right. Yeah, once you get started.
I'm not sure if Ian or Chris wanted to add anything to that, or
yeah,
do anything to add?
No, I think you covered it, Simon. It was, I'm not sure we've done the task correctly, but I didn't have great support in the group. Simon, non-conformist, and then we just done it wrong, done differently. I think we did.
I think it's just about getting you to think about, ideas and impacts, and it, like, some of us discovered it's not as easy as we think. The solutions are not as easy as we think, are they?
It's been a really interesting. I've got a bit of it's been an interesting. Something has kind of dawned on me. I've been working with Calvin for a little while, and we're planning to do this work together, and I haven't quite realised how important having a truthful, honest conversation, people to be able to have a truthful, honest conversation about what it is going to look like, and what are our values, our real values, not having an iPhone every year perhaps, or maybe we do need, but actually that is probably one of the most important things to happen next. And it's about getting rid of this noise in the background, this kind of national noise, and we need a very local conversation, an honest and a truthful conversation, understand what our options are and what the outcomes of those options are going to be, because I don't think it's going to be as scary for places like Treherbert as we're being told. We haven't actually got that much to lose. We haven't got an Apple factory here. We don't produce iPhones. We've got, we have got a plastic Windows factory that might need to be looked at. But actually, once the community think about that and they think, well, actually, we need to change this to a wooden manufacturing, and actually that's not, you're still going to keep your job. You're still going to be able to, holiday in Wales or whatever. But I think what Calvin was saying, I was really imagining it as a set of like graphic equalizers where you want to spend more time at home and less time in work, or you want to stay local and not spend as much time on the train. And then you get a list of what that looks like in life. Now, I don't think that's an easy thing to do, but I kind of think that for me, it dawned on me today that this is probably one of the most important things that we need to do next, is tell people what this actually looks like. What are we talking about?
Just to come in on that, it's we dropped the word post-capitalist. You drop the phrase post-capitalist, and it's immediately loaded very heavily with the political perspectives and values, and it kind of gets a knee-jerk reaction. But really, what the penny that dropped for me was when Calvin was talking about that transition in getting people to talk about what a society would look like and how things would be different. And you can, in a society that is different to the current political system and different to the current economic system, which even less scary, just means having a longer term outlook instead of short termism. And that seems to, just looking at my notes throughout today's chats and listening to everybody speaking, there's little trigger words that come up a lot. So local is a huge one. It's, local across the board seems to be one of the main solutions. And I think perhaps that might have been one of the impacts, is it brings a local focus to an outlook on how we can do things differently. And if we can add into that an element of more of a long-term outlook, so, the political system is very guilty of being very short-termism, because MPs and MEPs get elected, and so therefore they don't want to talk about stuff that's unpopular. So therefore, by definition, the system, systemically, they're sort of trapped in trying to be popular to get into power, when some issues need a longer-term focus. So that's a systemic problem that's an issue. And then economically too, the short-term, the profit motive, short-termism, business doesn't allow the luxury, or now perhaps not so much luxury because of where we are, to be able to plan forward a little bit. So again, just in my sort of limited readings of Kelvin, which is kind of what kind of inspired me to come along and get involved, as well as being originally a local guy. I think they're the impacts that interesting that have come kind of consistently throughout. It's kind of the same things, local, and starting from that way and looking at things a little bit differently.
I would, sorry, to also mention the specific point around that was mentioned by, I think Ian mentioned Plymouth, but I'm more aware of the counties in the north of England, counties, where they used the public sector pension funds, went through them to look at the climate change damage, and then looked at investing those pension funds in local organisations and companies. An example was town centre building that was falling apart, invested in it, had employed local young people, did the building up and got quite a hefty return on their investment. So that's something that even on a little scale we're able to do. So Interlink has done the same process, and we've had to, say we want to earn less profit to have a better investment system that's more viable for local people and for our values. So there's that specific piece of probably we can look at.
And life balance was a bit similar to the last group, sort of life balance and well-being. Just that, the way that Welsh Government is starting to look at and guide how we're evaluating what is our value in life, and that emphasis on Future Generations Act and well-being. I think that's a really big deal and a very positive thing to try and look at it through a different lens. So if one of the impacts of what we were talking about kind of led to that and helped that too, that would obviously be a positive.
Okay, so anybody else got anything to add? Or Anne?
There's two hands raised. Anne raised, Draper, but Anne's, I don't think Room 2 have responded yet, and Anne's in that group. Yeah. Oh, right.
Yeah. I can feedback for our group if you've got time.
Yeah, we got time. No problem.
We like the other groups. We got you're straight into a whole load of complexity and realizing that actually it's quite more complicated than you might think, that you might immediately think. So we had the basic community land available to communities as one of our seeds, connection and the theme of engagement, and kind of general behavior change, culture and of change, developing a culture of change. So when we came down to a number of things to talk about, the word partnerships came up, is that, doing things collaboratively, partnering with other organizations. We had a quick discussion about food, food as in food banks connected to the pandemic, the old kind of healthy eating, health promotion type agendas that used to be there that then got defunded and no longer there, or eating healthily and sustainably, locally, and good for the planet. So all those three agendas could be tied up together, people working together. So that general thing was about partnerships. One of the things about research and things we've heard today, where there's research and policies have been, thinking's been developed either scientifically or social, economically, that those get quickly fed down into policies and then even more quickly out to engage with communities who can use that information to actually do things locally or collectively together. So that was number 2. And I'm actually lost track of whether we actually arrived at number 3. We were, you know, all the things that people have said about wealth from shared resources, engaging with young people to make, you know, systemic change in thinking. And just last but not least, to me, the whole business about doing things differently or thinking out of your box, all to me is the definition of being creative. And I think creativity, imagination, I would really put that into the mix, that it's not some airy-fairy thing that's kind of around because you work in the arts. It's actually a fundamental way of thinking that we really, really need. So just wanted to finish that. Thanks.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Anne. Peter, you were next and then Ian. I can't, is there any other hands up, but I can't see? Dareth, no? Okay. Peter, then Ian. Thank you.
Yeah, really, it was just a case of sort of saying that the real focus, I think, for myself is, you know, even though we started off talking about sort of climate change, et cetera, and that acts as a sort of a starting point, but actually, what we all want is, you know, a better quality of life, you know, and that's going to mean different things to different people. But I think, you know, taking the point that, you know, that Chris was talking about, you know, and tracking, you know, is it the fact that you don't want to spend 45 minutes stuck in a traffic jam, you know, traveling between Tonypandy and Cardiff, you know, is that the thing that sort of really bugs you, etc., or is it the fact that you just want to be comfortable in your own home, you don't, or you struggle with the bills, or you know, you want to be able to walk down the street at night safely, and you don't have to worry about, you know, other things happening which are out of your control, all those sorts of things. I think, you know, to my way of thinking, what we're all in this game for is for a better quality of life, and I think we need to take that that sentiment and almost sort of go, you know what, that climate change is part of that, but you know, climate change isn't that. You know, that's an element that we don't want to have our houses flooded. You know, we don't want to be, you know, having to sort of put an extra infrastructure to cool our houses in 20 years' time. You know, we don't, you know, all those sorts of things. And I think it's selling that to the public, and how do we communicate that to the public to be able to say, look, there's some choices here, but what we're all striving to do is deliver this, and that's part of a journey, not just for us, but also for you and the institutions that represent you. So yeah, it's just making that point, really.
Okay, thanks, Peter. Ian?
Well, I just wanted to sort of add to what Anne said, really, and about that conversation, about creating spaces for these conversations to be had in communities across diverse groups of people. And the arts are kind of the best way of doing that in our experience. It's about, and I think we wouldn't actually be wasting money if we'd done a huge art drive across the whole of RCT to have conversations about this and embedded artists in our communities to work with whoever they can come across and have workshops around this. And I think if we want to create that conversation, the arts is one of the best mechanisms we've got in society to create those safe spaces to have conversations. So I think, you know, that is what's come to me, that we've got to have a truthful conversation. And maybe the best way to do that is to use arts and culture. And if RCT Council could do something like that, I think that would be quite amazing.
Yeah, I agree. That would be fantastic. And, you know, in my background as well, I used art a lot to have conversations with people and engage people, and it does get people's thinking going, and you get much better conversations going because of it.
We can all contribute to art as well, you know. We can bring it down to not high level, highbrow stuff, down to a community art level where we can all get involved in the conversation, build those relationships that Simon was talking about through collective activities, and then we can have that conversation. But I think, you know, that would be the biggest thing that RCT Council could bring. If they could bring, you know, we're talking about £1 million, you know, £1 million to embed artists for the next 4 years in every town in RCT to have conversations, create art together, and have these discussions. I think that would be because it's about getting us all on board now. I think we've got everything in front of us. We all know what needs to be done. It's about convincing that majority that are perhaps not engaged in this conversation to be part of this change.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask, we got a few announcements now, but while we're doing that, I wondered if people could put in the chat one thing they're going to take away from today that they're going to change or they're going to look at. Just something, some little spark that started within you, if there is one. Hopefully there is. And while you're doing that and thinking about that, I'm going to ask Nadia Bogdan to say a little bit about the National RCT Together for Our Planet funding that's becoming available soon.
Yeah, I better unmute myself before I start talking, hadn't I? As Don said, we've got a programme open at the moment. It's called Together for Our Planet. It's a small grant that's been administered by our UK funding team, and it's around getting communities involved in climate change and taking action on climate change. So, like I said, there's awards of £1,000 to £10,000, and they cover in areas such as food, transport, energy, waste and consumption, and the natural environment. We're not asking organisations to be an expert in any of these areas, and we're particularly interested in hearing from people and organisations who are just starting to think of taking action on climate change. So the application deadline is 5 o'clock on the 18th of November. So it's not open for a huge amount of time. We've got £2.5 million to spend on the projects that come in. We have had a few applications in from Wales, but not a huge amount. So we would love to see more coming in from Wales. We're hoping to prioritise applications from people and communities that have been hardest hit by climate change, those who are starting to think about climate action, groups who haven't received funding from us before, and smaller organisations. Other organisations can apply, but like I said, they're trying to prioritise those types of groups. So like I said earlier, it can cover food, transport, energy, waste and consumption, and the natural environment. But projects also need to meet at least 2 of the following criteria. I will put a link to the page in the chat so people can see that. So we're looking for projects to support the development of longer-term climate action within communities. So that stuff taking place after sort of November and longer than November. Projects encouraging communities to plan for the climate emergency, to consider what climate action could mean to them and why it matters. Projects that celebrate the importance of community-led climate action, encourages more people to become involved. Projects that build resilience in communities that are hardest hit by climate change, and projects that potentially provide job skills or training opportunities for communities which support climate action. So we will support a range of projects. So if any of you has any ideas, then please either contact us. My contact details are in the chat, or you can download an application form and apply online. So I will put the information in the chat now. Another little thing from us is we're also developing a Sustainable Steps climate action programme in Wales, the first of which will be launched in December, which is a mentoring programme. And then in 2021, there will be other programmes opening underneath that. So a small grant up to £15,000 for organisations. And then later on in the year, a larger grant up to £350,000. And we will be doing some stuff after, probably in 2023, around young people as well. So just keep your eyes open for that. But hopefully, as these meetings continue, I can bring some more information in about that as well. So if anybody's got any ideas, please get them down on paper and get them into us.
Sorry, I've been muted again. Should people contact you if they want any advice about this? Hang on, you moved
Sorry,
it.
I've done
Sorry, I know.
Sorry. They can contact myself, or they can contact our UK team directly. There's information on those contact details on the website as well.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. And I want to ask Simon James to tell us about a new initiative that is happening at Interlink.
Slightly new, so yeah. So Dawn started off for us. So we run. So we've got a website called Connect RCT. So that's a website for anybody to talk about community activities and make connections on. It's made a great gun so far, as well as volunteering opportunities. So it was only launched in March, so it's quite new. But one part of that, we're going to set up a climate change team. But more importantly, already we've got Ask the Expert. So you can put yourself to win a badge to say I'm able to give advice and support on anything you want, including climate change. But I think more important for us at this stage and with this group is to say we also run peer support systems. So rather than Interlink staff give advice badly, we aim to get the experts in the sector talking to each other and give advice to local groups. And we've got a pot of funding that we use to do that. So if you think, you're out there and you think actually somebody would want to speak to you, or you could give some advice, whether it's a little bit of nature reserve or it's an energy action plan, and you think you give advice to the sector from the sector, so it's got to be third sector to local groups as opposed to private sector or anything like that. We would help them, for example, if you want to spend half a day or a couple of hours with the group giving advice, we would help fund that piece of work. So it's to stop people taking time out of their day jobs when they're really busy to make sure they've got time and space to support others and to work with others. And besides for that, I think after this event, we'll be talking to Dawn about how we bring this group back together and potentially use that budget and that support to do further events and further advice and support and training, coming back to this type of forum type of activity. So anybody's interested, you've got something to give, drop us a bell and we'd love to get you involved and work with everybody else in the room.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And of course, just to remind you that there is still support available from Renew Wales for any community organisation, community council. We can work with school groups as well, groups within schools, anybody like that wants to take action on climate change. We've still got capacity to take on new groups in RCT, so let us know and encourage others. If they're not here today, just let other groups know as well. We want to do as much as possible. Okay, is there anybody else got anything to say before we close? Anybody thought of anything since you've been speaking? Are you all happy?
One question, are you going to post up this recording anywhere? Is it going to be available for those who haven't been able to attend?
Yes. Does anybody want a copy? Just let us know and I can send you a copy of the recording and you can share that with others. Is that okay? Okay, brilliant. Okay, thanks very much for your attendance, and we'll keep you up to date and with anything else that's going on following this meeting. We'll let you know about that. If you need to contact me, I think you've all got my email address. Just, contact me for any reason, anytime. I'm permanently working. It's fine. So thank you ever so much for your time today, making it a great event. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Bye.